All right, hi everyone. Welcome to Mindgasms. So I just got baked and it gave me a creative urge. So I decided to make my reaction video to Jordan Peterson's latest silliness today instead of tomorrow. So I am Andrew, aka Booty Loving Mindgasms, for the purpose of this video. And I am going to react to the great, famous, history-changing, important, intellectual Jordan Peterson, his recent appearance on his daughter's podcast, Mikhaila Peterson, in which he hilariously doubled down on his claim on Twitter that this slightly fat Sports Illustrated swimsuit model being on the cover is somehow authoritarian and she's objectively not beautiful. So he eventually rage quit Twitter because there was such a negative backlash and people were making fun of him. So in this, he doubles down, and hence the title of this video here. This is her title that I'm literally quoting, that she's literally quoting his words. Fuck you if you don't like it. All right, so let's get into this.
A couple weeks ago, you tweeted something out
good.
that, yeah, I'm going to bring it up,
Okay.
that got a crazy amount of attention, which...
Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition, I believe you're referring to.
Yes.
I tweeted out, sorry.
Look at his facial expression there. He really is like, God damn it, why'd you bring this up?
Not beautiful. Yeah, people weren't very happy with that.
And then everyone got upset.
Yes, they did. And then I left.
See, he didn't just say, sorry, not beautiful. He said, sorry, not beautiful, and then a whole bunch of, like, manipulative stuff. And then I don't remember whether it was that tweet or the second tweet where he said that, like, he basically said this woman is objectively not beautiful, so her being on the Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition cover is authoritarian, which really, and he doesn't even mention that in this video, which is kind of a crucial part of why people were criticizing him, because why is it authoritarian for them to put a thick girl on the cover of Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition? Why does he have to like who they put on there? Like him, it seems like he's demanding that there should be a woman on there that he thinks is sexually attractive. So why does he get to decide? Like, he doesn't even realize that he's being hypocritical with his arguments here.
Twitter again, more or less right after that. And everyone assumed that that was why. And it wasn't.
No.
It was, I suppose in some sense it was, because what happened was an indication of the problem with Twitter, but I had been not reading.
So it wasn't because of what happened, but it was because of what happened, kind of.
Twitter comments for about 3 weeks, although I had been tweeting through an intermediary, one of my staff members. So I'd email him a tweet, but not reading comments because I found that quite
irksome.
Yeah.
Like you're associated with the
devil.
She's laughing at it like, being on here is the devil. Yes, he found it rather irksome. That's kind of a fucking understatement.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, it was like sort of like standing in a public park where anybody, no matter who they were, could come up and yell at you to any size audience about anything they wanted, day or night. And so I've been thinking that through. I'm going to write it.
Yeah, that's kind of what Twitter is. Like, you're supposedly this free speech warrior guy, so why don't you just, like, ignore people if they annoy you and don't let them get to you? That seems like kind of a more stoic, traditional, manly response to people being mean to you on Twitter, I would say.
Article about what's wrong with Twitter and social media in general. But no, I looked at the Sports Illustrated cover, and they had a rather overweight young woman, quite symmetrical,
Okay, he does say, admittedly, credit where credit's due, quite symmetrical, like he goes on to say in a second, that she has a beautiful face. So yeah, like I think most people would agree with that, but rather overweight. See, this is why what people define as beautiful is subjective. Yeah, like even if you believe that there's some objective measures to an extent, and I think the ones that he lists here are phenomenally exaggerated, and a lot of scientists who have studied all of these fields disagree with this sort of thing, and a lot of people like Christopher Ryan wrote that great book Sex at Dawn about, different ideas about hunter-gatherers than a lot of people have talked about, and Dr. Robert Sapolsky writes in his book Behave and other books about how some ideas that Steven Pinker has had about the evolution of humans are incorrect. And, these objective biological, supposedly beauty standards, some of them make sense because evolutionarily there are ways of men being attracted to women and women being attracted to men. But they're like really subjective depending on the person and depending on the culture too. And like nowadays, my brilliant intellectual theory that I'm not sure if I've mentioned before is that it seems like the booty is more popular with women nowadays than it used to be, and it used to be more that the boobies were popular, but now it seems like more the booty. And I think that's mostly from hip-hop in the 90s, when at least that's when I'm nostalgic about it, because that's when I was a teenager, and maybe like from then forwards how much it influenced culture, like the black backup dancers with that nice booty being in those videos, and then it became so much more prevalent on porn too. It's hard to know which came first, but that's my sociological theory. Anyway, a lot of people think that this woman, I put her in the thumbnail of this video. A lot of people think that she is attractive, and I would say that she is, like, I don't know, a little overweight. It depends on how you define it, and a lot of guys are into that. I think she's pretty hot. Whether you define her as attractive or not is not the same thing as like whether she should be on a magazine cover or not. Like, you're talk about the idea of physical perfection and stuff, but maybe they're talking about different beauty standards or something. Is that the end of the world? You could still do both. Like, no one's saying we're not going to have like super unhealthy thin models on there. And like if you think about bodybuilders, for example, like male bodybuilders or UFC fighters or power lifters, like what I did once, if you lose weight to get into a weight class, that's a really unhealthy thing for your body. And especially if you're doing a bodybuilding competition, you could look like the pinnacle of health for a man, but then as soon as you get off stage, you practically collapse because your body fat is too unnaturally low and you're dehydrated and all that kind of shit. So it's not physically healthy for women to look like that on the covers either. And that doesn't mean that they shouldn't do it, but that means that maybe that's a more realistic standard of beauty that's healthy. But that doesn't mean that you have to be attracted to fat chicks or something like that. No one is even saying that.
So nice facial features and so forth, with a very revealing swimsuit on the cover.
Oh no!
And I thought, no,
no,
like, not in a personal way, but it's unbelievably manipulative for about 3 different reasons. The first is it's a very tawdry.
Okay, how is it like he's about to say, but manipulative? Yeah, fucking right, man.
Attempt to capitalize on cheap sales. And I mean cheap in a specific way. Sports Illustrated hit the gold mine with their swimsuit cover, I suppose 20 years ago, whenever they established that, because it was obviously it's a sports magazine. So it's about athletics. It's about athletic people. It's about athletic bodies. And they had a swimsuit issue, and it really was a big hit. And then it became kind of a cultural icon. And it's a very specific.
I think a more accurate criticism would maybe be that, they're doing woke virtue signaling stuff and having a plus size model on there to appeal to the millennials or the Generation Z or whatever they're called, the younger generation, because they're supposedly woke and because the Sports Illustrated magazine is very much not popular anymore, especially for people in a certain generations like millennials and younger like me. So maybe the people at Sports Illustrated magazine are like woke virtue signaling to try to draw more young people to it. That would be a better criticism that would actually make sense to an extent.
Specific kind of cultural icon because it focuses on a very exceptional kind of high-end beauty. And so that beauty would involve symmetry and signals of youth, because that's part of beauty, sexual beauty.
See, that's kind of subjective too. Like, it is true, and I've talked about this too when I talk about Foucault, oddly enough, ironically enough, because Jordan Peterson makes straw man criticisms of him all the time, that, you know, throughout human history, it was considered normal for adult men to have sex with child boys, and, you know, for what we would define today as pedophilia was normalized. And I made a video about how that was a normal part of Spartan culture, and it was part of a lot of different cultures. That certainly doesn't mean that this is a good thing, but it also doesn't mean that every man likes young women. Like, you know, a lot of guys like older women. Is it safe to say that all men like younger women? No. Like, what percentage? Is it the majority of men? And even if it is the majority of men, why does that matter? Why do you have to, like, why can't you experiment with different things? Or, you know, like, what are their motivations? You're assuming that you know their motivations if you're talking about how they're lying and it's manipulative in some way. Like, there's no fucking evidence for that, man.
Physical beauty, waist to hip ratio for women. But with Sports Illustrated, it's also highlighting a kind of athleticism in body type. And that's a very specific form of beauty. You have to be young, you have to be female, generally, you have to be extremely athletic, you have to be shapely in a very particular way, and that would be with a waist to hip ratio of 0.68, because that's what's been established cross-culturally.
So waist to hip ratio 0.68. Like, are we making measurements of women now for their requirements of being on magazines? Like, a lot of models starve themselves way too much anyways. Like, you can kind of tell what looks attractive, which is kind of the argument he's making. But you know, like, you don't have to, there's no specific measurement of where what something objectively attractive is and what something subjectively attractive is. Like, there's not one specific mathematical calculation that you can fucking make to determine whether a woman is objectively attractive or not. That's like ridiculous, man.
Cross-culturally as ideal from the perspective of male sexual interest, let's say, but that's also associated with fertility.
Yeah.
And so it's a marker that has a biological basis. And so even if you're a very beautiful woman, you're hard pressed to be beautiful enough to be on the cover of Sports Illustrated for the swimsuit issue. And so it's a pinnacle achievement of sorts. And it's focused on a very idealized and specific form of beauty.
Okay, but I mean, it's a huge achievement for this woman too. Like, it's not like her being on the cover is not still an achievement. That, like, he just thinks it's the wrong kind of achievement. Like, why does he get to decide? It's not like they're deliberately doing it to piss him off or something like that. He seems to be deliberately offended almost by this. I don't understand why he fucking cares so much.
Beauty. And that's obviously exclusionary. It's obviously exclusionary. It excludes everyone. Right. And
who said anything about inclusion for this woman? Like, did anyone say that's the reason she was on there? Like, you know, like, how do you know why they decided she should be on there, man? Like, jeez.
Does that to highlight a kind of ideal, and that's a particular ideal of beauty. And there are some cultural boundaries around that. So you could say, well, it's a westernized form of beauty.
It
It's
is.
like, yeah. And you can point to Rubens'
It's like
paintings.
it's Western Protestant Christian traditional values basically. Like this is a young woman with a high waist to hip ratio, or whatever. She's got boobs, but she's still skinny. Like I don't know, like Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow in the Avengers movies, like super lean, but also has curves, like that kind of very difficult to attain body, like a bodybuilder, or not necessarily difficult to attain body, but super difficult to attain strength, like especially if you're cutting to make weight for a competition like that, or like in an MMA competition. Like all of these things are super difficult and hard for your body, like I said, right? And like you don't have to be that extreme and specific about it. Like again, like why does he get to decide what's supposed to be on a fucking magazine? And well, like, who said you have to fucking read it or look at it if you don't like it anyway? Like, and what he's about to mention here is super oversimplified too.
Of more plump women and say, well, there's an exception. It's like, great. You think you're a genius for finding that exception. Good for you.
Okay, but it's far more than one exception. Like, this standard of beauty of like a super thin woman, especially if we're talking about supermodels, like not even something like Scarlett Johansson in the Avengers movie, like they're so skinny that they melted away their fucking curves. They don't even have any curves. They're like rail thin, and like that's not even attractive to some guys. Like I don't like for the point is that for most of human history, this super skinny woman being a supermodel was not normal. It was more normal for a woman to be like fat, because until recently in human history, as he's about to talk about, actually, oddly enough, they're like more rich people were, if you were fat, it was a signal that you that you were rich, because the poor people couldn't afford to eat. And then he's about to talk about how we have unhealthy food habits in the West, and fast food is really cheap, so poor people are fat, basically, which is the reverse of what it's been like throughout human history. So this isn't just a lone exception, it's actually more common in history than the one that he says he is that he is advocating for, basically.
The Rubens painting, like, more power to you, but that doesn't mean anything at all about the universality of images of beauty. And
okay, he makes a whole bunch of statements about universal values of beauty here, and again, like, he's really exaggerating what is scientifically true about this. Like, a lot of scientists in a lot of different fields disagree with him about this. Like, all of the people like Jonathan Haidt, David Sloan Wilson, Chris Ryan, Dr. Robert Sapolsky, who is an expert in like 6 different fields, and all of his books are phenomenally multifactorial and use multiple fields to analyze situations, and do not entirely agree with all of these, maybe to an extent, but definitely not anywhere near to the extent of what he's saying here.
The cover bothered me a lot because it was a cheap manipulation of something that had been working very well for Sports Illustrated. It was also an insistence that all of a sudden...
Okay, but it's a cheap manipulation in the same other way. It's objectifying women sexually either way, and people like that. So, like, according to your own values, oh, wait, do you see a problem with that because of, like, your puritanical Christian values or something? I mean, why not just be honest about that if that's the case? I don't understand why to fucking care about it so much otherwise.
This non-athletic body type is as beautiful as the standard swimsuit
Okay,
model
but
for a
no
sport.
one's actually saying that. You're assuming that her being on the cover is meant to imply that she's equally as beautiful as some starving model or some traditional, like, I don't know, superhero comic book looking woman like Black Widow in the Marvel movies. But like, no one said that they're supposed to be seen as equal by everyone now. No, who said that? Like, no one did, man.
For Sports Illustrated. And it's not. It's not as athletic, and it's not as healthy. And that's that. And it's also not arbitrary.
Okay,
and so,
again, like, no one said that her being on the cover is healthy either. Like, who said that? I don't know who said that.
the whole thing is a lie. And then it's a lie.
It's not a lie.
That's a manipulation of that young woman. Now she partakes.
Like, again, it's a manipulation of that young woman. In the same, it's a manipulation of every woman who's a model. And, like, it seems more consistent with, Jordan Peterson's values to just let her do what she wants with her own body. That would kind of make sense from a, the right to control your own body kind of libertarian view of, what a woman can do with her own body. But I don't know why he has to be so authoritarian about it. Well, on Twitter, he claimed that her being on the cover was somehow authoritarian.
Takes in that because she participates in it. But it's still, they're not on her side. They're exploiting her.
How do you know that,
as far as I'm
man?
concerned.
How do you
and
know
she
that?
may be participating in that exploitation,
but
they're still exploiting her. So don't pull any moral stunts on me because you're irritated about my opinion.
You're the one who's making a fucking moral claim. Like, why? How are they making a moral claim by putting her on the cover? You're the one who's making a direct moral claim about it. If you're assuming that a piece of art just existing, or just a person on a cover existing means that it's an implicit moral claim, then that sounds to me like, a legitimate criticism of some fringe hardcore lefties that speech is violence. And that's like the equal level of intellectual value I would give to both of those opinions, I would say.
Opinion about the Sports Illustrated cover when it's bloody clear to anybody with eyes that was manipulative in 20 different ways.
How?
And I'm also not willing to sacrifice
manipulative in like 20 different ways. Yeah, bro, you said 2
ideals for inclusiveness. It's like, no, not everyone's a genius. No, not everyone's Picasso. No, not everyone's young and healthy. And no, not everyone is a Sports Illustrated swimsuit model, period. And fuck you if you don't like it. So
why is he so fucking pissed off about it, man? Like, holy shit, he's gonna die on this stupid hill that no one cares about, man.
That's basically what I thought about that. I certainly didn't think it would cause as much trouble as it did. And people were on my case for being mean. It's like, yeah, I know, I'm always mean.
No. See, a lot of people who I saw criticizing him, they weren't on his case for him being mean. They were on his case for overreacting and literally claiming in his tweet that it was authoritarian for this slightly fat woman to be on the cover of the Sports Illustrated magazine because he did not find her attractive. People like that's who people who I respect, like Kyle Kalinske and a lot of others, said in this criticism of him. Like, no one said, who I saw criticizing him anyway, that he had to find her attractive. Everyone seemed to have the opinion that I did, that no one expects you to find her attractive. If you don't look at the fucking magazine. Who cares? Like, I thought you were like a freedom of speech advocate. Why do you have to control the shit that's going to be on magazines so much?
Well, also, like, life is hard and like life is mean, right? And it's hard for people. First of all, I have great sympathy for anybody overweight because of the health struggles I went through. And you lost a whole bunch of weight. It's not like being overweight's fun, right?
No one says that her being on the cover means that being overweight is good and fun. Like, you're totally just adding that interpretation there.
No,
that's a whole other problem to get into with. I think people have such an issue losing weight that society has said, you know what, it's fine. because you've had so much trouble that it's probably your genetics.
Yeah.
So
well,
you
and
might
there's truth in that.
Okay, but that's a totally separate thing too. Like, it's just her being on the cover. It's not adding all of these other things that they're saying.
At someone who's obese on the street, I think, oh, that's too bad. Like, that's too bad. I don't think, obese pig eats too much, has no self-control. I don't think that. I think bad mismatch between genetic proclivity and appalling diet. And the appalling diet is basically, we're not going to get into this, but basically carbohydrate heavy and sugar loaded. And fair enough,
I think that's a little bit of an oversimplification, but yeah, generally speaking, people eat too much and eat too much sugar and stuff is a lot of the reason that a lot of people are overweight in Western culture, for sure.
Tried hard, the whole world, to make calories cheap. And we did that. So no one's starving, and great. But now we have an obesity.
And again, that's why, like I said, he goes all the way back to saying that because food became cheap, it means that people don't have to starve anymore. So, like I was saying before, for only recently in human history was it the case that poor people were fat and rich people are more likely to be skinny because they can afford to get the more expensive, healthier foods like kale and, fresh meat, or go hunting and get your own meat instead of getting like burgers at McDonald's. So that's why for most of human history, like I said, the more fatter women were seen as more attractive because only wealthy people could eat to excess, because the poor people starved because food was expensive. Like, he doesn't even see this contradiction in his own argument.
Problem, and it's a major problem. And I'm not going to pretend that it's okay. It's not okay. That doesn't mean I don't have sympathy for it. And I'm not willing to sacrifice.
It's not okay? That's kind of fucking authoritarian, dude.
Any ideals for this idiot inclusiveness. I'm done with that. And so should everyone else be. And I think most people are. And they look at that cover.
Yeah, because you're the only one who fucking drew attention to it, man.
No, it's manipulative and a lie in a deep sense.
Presents spinning.
So it's manipulative and a lie in a deep sense. Yeah, bro. Oh, man. I love Jordan Peterson, if nothing else, because he's so entertaining, because he's inadvertently hilarious sometimes. All right, so yeah, I've talked about that for long enough. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Hope you liked my little fun video about the latest silliness from Jordan Peterson. Again, I always like to clarify that I don't think he's wrong about everything or something stupid like that. And I think a lot of people, like people on the Majority Report, for example, go too far and claim that he's like some racist white supremacist or some shit like that, which I think is going way fucking overboard. I think his book Maps of Meaning is good, and his earlier psychology lectures from years ago were good, but he's gotten way too over-focused on Christianity. He's kind of like way too emotional about a lot of things most of the time lately. And anyway, yeah, subscribe to the channel, click that like button, share this everywhere, click that bell to be notified when I come out with new videos. This weekend, we'll finally do that podcast with Chris and Dusty about Taxi Driver, 70s movie, Martin Scorsese movie with Robert De Niro, about one of the first incel mass shooters, basically. And yeah, like I always say, oh yeah, check out my Patreon. Link is in the description of the video as always. And like I always say, I love you all. Keep being the tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. And most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all, and groove is in the heart. And just try to be entertained by the silliness of what people like Jordan Peterson sometimes say, because I think it's really hilarious. All right, so yeah. Adios until next time, everyone.